Good morning, I'm Martha Chaklin. I'm chairing this session this morning. For those of you who had hoped to see Alex West, unfortunately, he will not be presenting this morning. But we have a very interesting first presentation by Wang Lianming. And he's a historian of global art focusing on early modern Sino-Europe exchange. He has a PhD in East Asian art history and is currently an associate professor at the Department of Chinese and History, City University of Hong Kong. He's worked all over the world, and he has a book which is published in German and Chinese?
German.
Just German. I know I'm not going to pronounce it because I don't speak German. And he's going to present this morning on Kingfisher feathers.
Okay. Should I use a microphone or?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much, Marta, for the very detailed introduction. Normally, I introduce myself as someone who works on animals. That's it. I think it's the most important things. I also love animals as well. We can talk about this later. I've got many of pets and animals at home. So today, thank you very much again, Julie and Radu for the invitation. I feel honored to present one of my research on the Qing global animal. So the Kingfisher birds were one of the exotic animal that's not indigenous in China as early as the first millennium BC. So first of all, how can I get, okay, click on, okay. First of all, I want to bring your attention to a very interesting publication that received the Leveson Book Prize in 2016, I guess, as far as I recall. It's a very thin book, about roughly 100 pages. You can finish and go through it within, just one afternoon. It's very interesting. And the sound argument made by Jonathan Schlesinger, who is a professor at IU Bloomington, he brought our attention to the disastrous consumption of the frontier goods in Qing China. And he brought up attention to the nature of these changes. Some of the frontier goods brought not from the outlying provinces, but from through the maritime connection to the capital, Beijing. But example discussed in his book include fur-bearing animals from Western Mongolian regions, like Western Mongol, Ulyankai, and freshwater pearls from Manchuria, which constitute a consolidated ethnic identity for the former frontier inhabitants, which is Manchus, but now the ruling class of China. But beyond the scope of Schlesinger, I think it's a little bit of pity that he didn't talk about Kingfisher. But of equal importance is that the Manchu conqueror of China likewise were exposed to unprecedented thousand things enabled by the radical transformation of political and economic geographies enabled by the establishment of the Qing Empire. For example, from the maritime trade routes, red coral from Mediterranean Sea. Imagine that 95% of red coral were not from China, but brought from the Mediterranean Sea, from Italy, for example. They were brought to the Qing court and used to adorn imperial sorceries, together with, for example, scarboards made from dyed shagreen from China Sea. Christine Gass has a paper on that, on the dyed shagreen. Yeah. And above all, numerous feather tributes from Southeast Asia stimulated emergence of new form of Manchu cosmopolitanism that further linked the Qing court to global histories. Among these goods, Kingfisher feather has always been a straightforward signifier of Manchu imperial subjects, as I will argue later. Departing from a feather headdress now kept in Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Cambridge. On the left-hand side, you see a newly taken photo by the department. So my talk will elaborate the social lives of Kingfisher feather by placing their productive use in both historical, which is pre-Qing, and contemporaneous Qing, which is early to mid-Qing, 17th, 18th century economic, political context. So my attention was first caught by a particular piece of headdress inlaid with pearls, gemstones, gilt metal plates, and Kingfisher feather, the one that on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you see the detailed pictures of the decoration. Although the color is partially faded, on the right-hand side you can see here, for example, the feather here is partially faded, but we can still imagine the opulence of the headdress when it was made. But this was a later piece made in 19th century instead of 18th century, but still tells you the opulence of this kind of headdress. So my question is, why feather mattered in the Qing period? Kingfisher feather were highly valued for its iridescent blue and sometimes turquoise color, and were consumed in China as early as 5th century BCE, so it's kind of early. Historically speaking, the common kingfisher, which I put it here, which is number A, common kingfisher, blue ear kingfisher, white throat kingfisher, you can see the white throat here, right? And the black-caped kingfisher, this is the black-caped kingfisher, were recorded as major sources for manufacturing the feather works in the Qing court. There are many species, but only 4 of them were recorded as major sources. Because kingfisher was highly sensitive to natural changes, ecological invasions due to the urbanization and infrastructure project in China's southern and central plains, and the resulting depletion of kingfisher populations transformed the feathers from local specialities to distant objects as early as the end of first millennium BC. So China had kingfisher, but as early as the first millennium BC, there was no kingfisher anymore. But you can tell from the map here, the majority of kingfisher species centered in the tropical South Asian island here, and some of them also in Kanto and in Hong Kong as well. Nowadays, you still can observe kingfisher, their activities in Hong Kong as well. So, although various species were recorded as having historically occupied the remote southwestern region of China, the feather market relied heavily on imports and involved transnational supply chains. Southeastern Asian polities that maintained a trade relationship with China proper were the major contributors, in particular the Khmer Kingdom during the medieval period, which is Cambodia, Siam, Thailand, Jiaozhi, and Qingtang, which northern and middle parts of nowadays Vietnam, and after Ming dynasty's maritime expansion. Orissa, for example, in nowadays state of Rajasthan, India, and Bengal, were recorded as supplied with kingfisher feather to the Chinese court. As always, with all natural products, kingfisher feather varied in quality. Only a small percentage of feathers, the so-called soft blue down feather, I'm not sure what you can see here. Maybe you can drag this way, how to do it. Come on, you can see it. Sorry, go back. This is a down feather, but it's blocked here. Can we somehow drag it? Okay. You can see the down feather here, the soft blue down feather, right? Plucked from the bird's back were considered usable. So this is all feather from one bird, but only a small percentage of down feather was considered useful for dotting with kingfisher feather. Now on the right-hand side, you see that the picture here gives us idea of how the shiny down feather were distinguished from other coarse hot blue. This is hot blue feather with black bubbles on the wings and tails, but they were not used for dotting kingfisher feather. On the South Asian market, kingfisher feather were offered. So people thought that the birds were killed when making the feathered item, but actually not. So the kingfisher feather were offered as a trade scheme, like this one I discovered in UCLA, a practice that presumably like the modern zoological specimen with removed viscera. Each bird could contribute only 20, at maximum 20 down feather for selection, and for the conservation of phoenix crown. You probably heard about the so-called Fengguan, the phoenix crown, excavated from Ming Dynasty mausoleum, Beijing. Over 10,000 feathers were collected for selection, which is equal to approximately 5,000 birds. So we're talking about for the conservation. So 5,000 birds were killed just for the conservation in the 1980s. The inlay technique, known as dotting with kingfisher blue, diancui, requires a complicated metalworking technique that developed from the filigree technique
that uses twisted gold threads. The full process involved a very complicated production chain that started with the feather selection and continued through the cleaning, framing, and gluing, for example, using fish glue, and inlaying, and finally, the application of additional embellishment like precious stones. The hairpin from Cambridge, now on the left-hand side. This one is dated to the 19th century, most likely. It gave us an example of how the feather artifact was manufactured. And you can compare with the drawing on the right-hand side from V&A. So first of all, the gold and gilt metals is used to inlay different patterns on the base. So first of all, you make the pattern, right? The metal pattern. And then the blue feather from the kingfishers are carefully placed on the seed to make it by using fish glue. So this is a fish glue. You should be heated beforehand, and you use the liquid of the fish glue and to attach to the feather and put on the back of the feather and attach to the metal plate. That is how they made. But actually, it's very complicated and developed from the medieval Chinese court, from the Song court. As shown in the Song imperial portraits, in particular Empress Yang's official portrait on the left-hand side, the shimmering turquoise color of auspicious clouds and creatures on the finished crown accentuate the celestial imagery and conveyed imperial authority. As a matter of fact, the Song finished crown was not purely novel invention, but recapitulates the Tang prototype with a distinctive dome-shaped crown. On the right-hand side, you see the excavated crown of Tang Princess Li Chui. Although it's unclear, because we cannot tell from image that it's whether the brilliant color in this portrait, left-hand side, really meant to evoke the kingfisher feather, or maybe a precious stone as well, right? The authoritative expression is clearly stated by its chromatic value, because this kind of color is cannot be made. It's taken from the nature, right? And which was reserved from the Song imperial woman. As recorded by the medieval Chinese written sources, the association between the kingfisher blue and the auspicious phoenix naturally became a primary choice for the Song phoenix crown. The assumption that the reduced application of a turquoise was caused by the Song's loss over in Asia was most likely possible, I would say. And in Asia is where the Tang dynasty imports of pigment and mineral originated. Then in fact, precious materials and the privileged use in the court reflected the state, geographical and economic changes, as I will argue. For example, what I'm trying to argue here is that during Tang dynasty, because of the control of Central Asia mines, so you can see the turquoise color used during in the Tang court, but because Song lost its control in Asia, most likely the color here is referred to the kingfisher feather blue as traded with the Khmer kingdom during the medieval period. In dynastic China, chromatic value was a matter of state importance. By the end of the 16th century, kingfisher feather was firmly established as a status symbol, as suggested by the excavated phoenix crown imperial headdress of the last Ming empresses and consorts, now on the left-hand side. The phoenix crown from the Qing mausoleum, which is the burial site of Wang emperor, with a clear reference to the early tradition of the phoenix crown, reinvented in the Song courts, are highlights of this kind of work. The crown were inlaid with kingfisher feather, as demonstrated by illustration from the collected statues of the great Ming Daming Huidian, and was thus codified in Ming sanitary laws. And its revival not only conveyed message of affluence, leisure, opulence, and prestige in dynastic China, but also symbolized the restoration of Han Chinese power after the century of Mongol occupation. Because we know that kingfisher feather were not used by the Mongols during the Mongol occupation of China. So manufacturing the phoenix crown thus reflected the Ming's expanding transnational connection and its access to distant worlds. And keeping this in mind, the emergence of kingfisher feather inlay in the Qing court thus became highly meaningful, as such a as such a practice previously had been absent from the Manchu craftsmanship. So Manchu's people did not know Kingfisher feather before the ascension to China proper. Because you probably know that they come from remote southwest area of China, they likely had an exchange with the Mongols and Korean courts, but not without familiar with this kind of maritime goods. Inheriting the Ming tributary system, albeit with modifications, the Manchu expanded their Central and Inner Asia trade networks to include global maritime goods, maritime routes. Viewed as local products connected to specific territories, the extensive flow of these precious goods reflected the Manchu's proficiency in accessing distant places and consequently of acquiring goods of particular interest to the court. As early as the beginning of the 18th century, Manchu vocabularies were filled with terms for maritime goods. For example, the Manchu Chinese reference book provides the earliest Manchu transliteration of the name of maritime material employed or used in the imperial workshop, including seashell here, and turtle shell, ivory, kingfisher feather, for example, rhinoceros horn, and various kinds of precious woods, sandalwoods, aromatic woods from India, for example, here, for example, Chuanxiang. The earliest lexical entry for kingfisher feather in Manchu language, which is Cui Gaha Idede. Cui is a Chinese loan word meaning blue. Gaha or Gasha means big bird. So a kind of, I'm a bit confused because normally Gaha stands for like eagle, big bird. But here they use Gaha and Idede, which is the feather, right? So the Cui is loan word from Chinese, meaning that this word was actually stirred from the Chinese language, right? So this Qing encyclopedia includes the earliest transliteration of the Gaha bird, seems based on its etymology from the Chinese sources. According to the place of origin, Kingfisher has been classified into 4 species, including 3 indigenous Chinese species from the southwest China, the green birds, which is Ugiyang sesik. So they kind of, first of all, they used Gaha, and then they turned Gaha into sesik. Sesik means sparrow, very small, like sparrow, right? So Ugiyang sesik means pig sparrow, pig sparrow. So I don't know why, but it sounds very interesting to me that it's Ugiyang sesik. And there's one species worth noting is that the Siam kingfisher, it's called Siam Lo Guru Ugiyang Gaha. It's bigger, so it's like the kingfisher from Siam, from Thai, is Gaha, but the other from China is called sesik. So the Siamese species seems like it's bigger, or at least looks bigger than the other Chinese species. As a result of the Manchu engagement with global exchange, knowledge of the taxonomy of kingfisher birds became remarkably detailed by the mid of the 18th century. Conceived as a part of a pseudo or proto-pseudo natural historical project of great state importance, the Qing Grand Council mobilized an extensive bureaucratic network. One of its tasks was to collect bird schemes to produce image for the bird, album of birds, Niaopu. Given the content of this book, it seems certain that some of the bird schemes traded from Siamese embassies were used for this project. For example, this is a Siam Gaha. So the big birds from Siam were collected by the court. Bird scheme were collected by the court. Kingfisher feather were frequently mentioned 2 types of Qing documents. For example, in receipt for orders for a sorcery placed or received from the imperial workshops, and the second type is the stock inventories of the imperial household department. Recorded as a Cui Che, Cui Pi, or Cui Che Pi, skin of kingfisher, or skin of blue sparrows. The imperial stock inventories, although incomplete, provide a detailed account of the stock records of feather tributes involving quantity, acquisition, and consumption of these feathers in the 18th century. As confirmed by imperial archival records, feather tributes, both domestic and international, should have been effectively secured through the maritime trade with Southeast Asia. In particular, feather traded indirectly from Cambodia. So I have assumption, because for this reason I went to Cambodia, that the majority of feather came from Cambodia. But because Cambodia did not have a direct tributary relation with Qing China, so all of the feather were actually traded indirectly from Siam. Siam, first of all, demanded the tributes from Cambodia and sold all the feathers to China. So in short, feather came from Cambodia, but they were traded by the Siamese embassies to China. So as you can see, a large number of Kingfisher feather added up to roughly 7,230 units during the Qianlong period. So the reason why I use the word unit instead of birds is because 1 unit counts for 2 birds. So 7,230 means that 14,000 birds was killed and brought to the court just for 1 year. After Manchu ascension to power in China proper, the privileged possession of frontier goods soon became the primary choice for conveying social status. In contrast to the inner Asia goods that define social hierarchy and rank, like Manchu freshwater pearls, they were preserved for the imperial families, Kingfisher feather was surprisingly not normalizing any no regulation tax. So you probably know that they were used. There are tons of examples that kept in the Palace Museum in Taipei and Beijing, like this one. But when you look at the regulation tax, the Kingfisher part has been excluded. So the Kingfisher feather was not recorded in any known normative tax of Qing. Meanwhile, the traditional Phoenix crown dotted with Kingfisher blue was always reserved for Han Chinese noblewomen like this one, who receive honorary title and ranks as conferred by the imperial mandate. The dichotomy of Manchu Han, Manchu on the right-hand side, Han on the left-hand side, you see dichotomy, is represented, for example, recorded in the French Jesuit Joachim Bouvet's L'État présent de la Chine, printed in 1693, I guess, 97, and widely circulated. Although Bouvet's interpretation was less grounded in actual practices than in reporting idealized, stereotypical practices, Phoenix crown with feather inlays was constantly imagined as belonging to southern Han Chinese noblewomen instead of Manchu. As suggested by the plenitude of the feather work, rules and regulation that emphasize the Manchu ethnicity nevertheless existed solely on paper. In the 17th century, so shortly after the Manchu ascension to China proper, for instance, the headdress of the Qing imperial woman, like this one, was distinguished by its simple and unpretentious design, mostly pearl hairpins to be worn on the wrapped head, so-called pan fa, wrapped head, very unpretentious, but soon underwent notable changes from A to B, which is wrapped head. Pursuing a rustic lifestyle, Manchu imperial women started to style their hair in the wrapped head style using a thin black hair scarf like this, a more elaborate form of previous wrapped head. People asking why, right? This significant stylistic change was of significant cultural value, and it mirrored the Manchu self-adjustment to the increasing diversity of the Manchu material world. In the printed version of Kangxi Emperor's birthday celebration, for example, the wrapped heads, like this one, use a black thin scarf, was in addition to Manchu gown, considered the most distinctive feature of the Qing imperial woman. So Manchu gown like this, right, in combination with the so-called wrapped head, bao chou. And simultaneously, the painting of the Qing imperial woman, now on the left-hand side, intermixed, complicated, and synthesized the regulated behaviors and actual practices of the Qing imperial world of leisure. So in practice, the imperial woman did wear the Kingfisher feathered items made of Kingfisher feather. Placing a shining hairpin consisting of twisted metal threads on the right-hand side red collar, and pearls and feather inlays at the one's temple is combined with the wrapped head and Manchu gown. So I did not find the exact one, but you can see the hair pie kept in Cambridge give us a typical example of this kind of feathered hair pie from the Qing court. The same desire culminated in a platter painting, 行乐图, from the Yongzheng court, roughly 1720, 1730, that highlighted the cosmopolitanism of the Qing imperial practice. Suggestively, it draws the viewer attention into a fictitious space. It's not real, but a fictitious space in which the Kingfisher hair pie are shared between two juxtaposed styles of costume that define identity. The first one is in the foreground is a Ming style Chinese Han woman, and in the background is Manchu goon, but they all wore Kingfisher feather, wore artifacts made of a Kingfisher feather. As a matter of fact, the wrapped head soon replaced by opulent hair pies dotted with Kingfisher feather on a special headdress called 辫子, like this one. So now we are at step 3. First is wrapped hair, 包头, 盘发, and to 包头, which is a wrapped head, to 辫子. This stylistic turn from rustic wrapped head via wrapped head to the 辫子 headdress achieved in the 3rd decade of 18th century was highly significant, but not reflected in any official Qing regulations. The invention of 辫子 proves the material wealth of early Qing, and most likely, this is my argument, was born in response to the growing diversity of goods fostered by the Qing engagement with the larger global dynamics. So when all the feather tributes came, they have to figure out the way to wear this, but the Manchu imperial woman refused to wear Ming-style phoenix. So they have to invent something for their own. That's the reason why 辫子 was invented for the Manchu imperial woman to help them to wear more accessories. As a reductive form of Ming-style phoenix, it enabled the Manchu imperial woman to wear more ornaments than ever before, yet reframed the feather with a strong sense of Manchu identity. Stylistically, it clearly differed from the Chinese phoenix crown on the left-hand side, both in its overall shape and its pattern of inlaid panels. It's very different. By the reign of Qianlong Emperor, roughly the 4th decade of the 18th century, more strict and elaborate clothing regulations for courtiers and military officials and imperial women, as well as for the imperial women, were imposed, those as a sign of the state efficacy and as means of maintaining a strong sense of Manchu ethnic identity. Because the Qianlong Emperor said, we are Manchus. We have to wear something not Han Chinese, but with typical and distinctive Manchu identity. That's the reason. He put emphasis on that. And a scroll of important documentary value executed by the Jesuit court painter Giuseppe Castiglione suggests that the feather inlay was actually, by latest of the mid of 18th century, included in the imperial ceremonial dresses on the right-hand side. Made of gold plate and twist metal threads, a badge now kept in Taipei, this one, exactly the same one as you can see on the right-hand side, crowns a symbol of longevity, inlaid with Kingfisher feathers and a large Manchuria freshwater pearls, typical Manchu, in its middle, and presents us a shining word dotted with a Kingfisher blue, which is far beyond our conception of Qing cosmopolitanism, rooted in normative text. So we saw this tons of examples dotted with Kingfisher feather, but it was not recorded in any Qing dynasty regulation and normative text. Just to conclude, as representative of maritime goods connected to the territorial locality, Kingfisher feathers were an important signifier for Manchu imperial subjects. Engaging in the Qing material practices, their productive use reflected major shifts in the long process of the Manchu self-fashioning after they actively engaged with the larger global dynamics. While the the phoenix crown remained appropriate for Han Chinese noble women. Qing imperial featherworks were consciously reconfigured, reframed, and incorporated into a new form of cosmopolitanism with distinctive Manchu features. In response to this enriched material culture, in particular the Kingfisher, the feather tributes of a Siamese embassy, the dressing and hairstyling practices of Manchu imperial women soon experienced major shifts from the so-called wrapped head to Dianzi headdress, the latter being a Manchu equivalent of the Han Chinese phoenix crown, which constitute the majority of Manchu feathered objects in Western collection, United States and Europe, including the Cambridge one. Because tons of examples are now kept in the Western collection, actually purchased in the long 19th century and beginning 20th century. I think I will stop here to leave enough time for discussion. And thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Do you want to check if there's anything online, just to make sure first, and then we'll take questions from the room, because
Not just us.
just wanted to see if there were any.
No.
Nope.
No.
Okay, any, Sharon? Just
Very interesting and sophisticated research. Yeah. Just short questions about the Kingfisher feather, because it have female and male. So, do you, in your studies, can you identify whether the Kingfisher feathers is mainly came from male or female, or both?
I think it's from both. It's hardly distinguishable, but I think both male and female contribute the same quality of feathers.
Or even for the crown for the female, they also use both Kingfisher.
Right. But just to follow up your question, that the male in the court, which is emperor, he also used Kingfisher to decorate his military weapons, for example. In the second half of the 19th century, there is one example reminded by one of my friends working in Paris. He saw in Fontainebleau there is a gold jar decorated entirely with Kingfisher feather on the surface. This is a very rare example, but we know that it was came to France during I guess it's Second Opium War. So it's certainly from the court. But that's the only example. The larger part of Kingfisher feather were used for imperial women.
do we?
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
Thanks for a very interesting presentation and for showing us so many beautiful objects. My question would pertain to logistics rather than the aesthetics of the beautiful Kingfisher feathers. When I was reading Derek Heng's book on on Chinese trade to the Indo-Malay world, I found out to my surprise that there were a kind of step process in several stages how Chinese acquired commodities from Southeast Asia. First, they were traded just by suppliers were sending gifts to Chinese courts, like tribute missions, and then slowly Chinese started to settle permanently, semi-permanently, and then permanently in Southeast Asia. The process obviously started in the late 12th century,
Right.
and by the 13th century they already processed many things, like semi-processed things, like timber for furniture was actually processed already on spot in Cambodia, Thailand, and Java to be sent to China. Have you found anything, about the logistics of this trade in Kingfisher feathers? I mean, I can imagine that, most of us obviously didn't know until now that not birds were sent there, just hides, just skins basically.
Right.
And then it's interesting anyway. So, do you think that Chinese were actually engaged in this process of acquiring the feathers, or they relied on local hunters to supply them the skin, or they did produce the skin locally already by medieval period? Do we know anything about this?
Well, we do know about it. There is a professor of sinology, Roderick Petak, at University of Munich, who wrote a paper about Ming Dynasty trade with Southeast Asia, in which he also includes the example of the Kingfisher feathers. So, but recently what I found is the bird skin also presented to him. He said, oh, that's interesting. So the story, the complete story is like this. As early as the beginning of the 15th century, the Chinese people traded with Southeast Asia for feather, but the feather were already provided as bird skin in Southeast Asia. Sumatra, for example. I don't know where exactly it is. I'm not a specialist of the Southeast Asia. They were offered on the market as bird skin as well, and were described by Portuguese travelers. And then, they were brought to China via so-called tributes, but the Siamese actually wanted to have a commodity exchange with China, right? They were actually sold as a commodity, and in return they received, like for example, porcelain, brocades, silk fabrics in return, right? So Kingfisher feather were very precious at the very beginning, but the price went down in the long course of the 18th century because the Qing custom in Kanto imported tons of the Kingfisher feather from Southeast Asia. We don't know where. It's my assumption that because the Qing did not have so-called tributary relation with Cambodia, and Cambodia was a major exporter, country who exported the feather. So my consumption that the Siamese, they first traded with Cambodian people, and then they gathered all feathers as bird skins, and they brought them to China at this.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thanks, Ming. It's a completely new world for me, and
Thanks for listening.
and it was such a rich and informative presentation you gave with much beautiful pictures and objects. I just want to go back to the color, the turquoise color, the turquoise blue color, and the meaning behind using animal parts and not mineral, because there's turquoise and lapis lazuli. So what happened to turquoise stones and lapis lazuli and colors like this? What's the meaning behind using animal elements? Is there for very precious objects, right? For very specific objects and for the elite, and is there anything about the power of the kingfisher? Is there any symbolism or apotropaic function of the feathers of some sort?
Thank you very much. I think I have a related comment because speaking frankly, I don't really know about details, but there is a saying, very famous saying from the 12th century Song court. It's a primary source, saying that the Khmer kingdom exported excessive number of feathers, and they use this money to build Angkor Wat. But I don't think that's true, because I can't find any other sources support this idea.
Sorry, and they uses this money from the feather commerce to build Angkor Wat?
Yes, but I don't think so. It's a Chinese source, right? Probably they heard about it like this, but there's no other source to support this idea. But basically, Song lost control of Central Asia, so they did not have access to precious stone like lapis lazulis, mainly from nowadays Afghanistan. They don't have the kind of exchange with Central Asian states and polities, right? So my assumption, I try to argue, but I cannot identify that whether the Song crowns were actually made of feather. But most likely, yes. We know that Cambodian people send tributes to the Song court. That's it. So I can only make a guess. But by the 18th century, Qianlong period, for example, they had access to all kinds of materials, lapis lazuli, jade, Xinjiang, because they conquered Tsungar, which is northwestern part now to Xinjiang, and they got access to all gold mines, copper, Yunnan, and feather. So in the Qing dynasty, it's completely different. They got access to all kinds of materials, raw materials. So in the Qing court, they use excessive number of kingfisher feather instead of turquoise. Lazuli was also used as well.
But I mean, the feather has different properties than the stone. It has a texture and it has a sheen
Iridescence.
that the stone doesn't have. So I have to think that it was a choice also about the qualities of the material and also
Much
perhaps the
lighter.
weight. If
Yeah.
you're wearing it on your head, wouldn't you rather have a feather than a stone?
It's light anyway, and symbolically, I mean, feathers. They
Yeah.
were always used for crowns, actually, in ancient times in many societies.
That's true.
Another reason why Chinese people, especially the court people, wanted to use feather is because they believe that the color of feather will not fade for centuries, which is not true. After several decades, you know. What I want to say, that the Qing had access to different kinds of objects and materials in the 18th century. I forgot what I want to say.
So apart from the economic, so it's definitely an object of prestige. I mean,
Yes.
they could, because it's so rare and so expensive,
Mhm.
and then of course it has very special features to it. I mean, the lightness,
Right.
the sheen of the color, and yeah. So yeah, thanks. Amazing.
You showed beautiful images, but also some illustrations from a bird album, right? Of
yeah.
Kingfishers.
Mhm.
And I saw the day 1760s, and I'm looking at similar bird albums a bit later in Japan,
Right.
Late 18th century, early 19th century. I was just wondering, can you find any connection between these illustrations of birds and you said that the import of these feathers increases towards the end of 18th century. So how do they interact, these interest in depicting the birds and using the feathers?
Well, thank you for bringing this up. I think it's very interesting because yes, the Mata talk about the chicken in Japan, and I look at the album of birds yesterday evening. There are 6 species of chicken, which is non-indigenous. Maybe some of them are Chinese, but some of them I cannot identify. Likely from, I don't know, people like Siamese or Dutch people brought them to the court. For example, as I mentioned that the kingfisher feather were offered at a bird scheme, so I can imagine that the painters at the court, they never saw a real live living bird, but instead they use the bird scheme to make the sketch and drawings, and then afterwards, they added the color. That's just a common practice. I can imagine that. But in that album, there's a very good study by Lai Yuzhi and Academic Zinica in Taipei. But this album is a difficult one because it not only includes the real animals, birds, but also mythical animals. There are 2 types of phoenix as well are included in this album. So it's a kind of combination of different kind of sources, mythical hybrid animal like creatures, and some real animals brought by the Qing maritime networks like kingfisher feathers and maybe chickens. I want to show you some images afterwards.
Yeah.
Some chickens maybe brought by, I don't know, through the tributes. Definitely there is a connection, yes. Because the Grand Military Council asked the prefecture and provincial governors to collect the bird scheme, word by word. They said, Miaopi, bird scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And send them to court.
Are these documentary albums? Because in Japan they illustrate the birds
Mm.
So we choose, the shogun chooses which ones to get.
Well, I think the key to understand the making of the bird album, and there's a beads album as well, is to look at the larger picture of what's going on in the 70s, 50s, and 60s. Qing courts did not only work on animals, but also start to survey the entire territory of its empire, first of all. Secondly, they made so-called ethnographic compendium, which is pseudo-ethnographic compendium of different people from Europe, for example. Something very similar to the beginning of 17th century Japan. You know, there's like a map with different kinds of people. And the third part of this project is animal.
I have a question.
Sure.
So there are also, it wasn't on your species map, but there are also kingfishers in Japan. I'm sorry. There are also kingfishers in Japan, and I wondered if the Chinese trade through Nagasaki also had evidence of kingfisher feathers going out.
Oh, okay.
Because most of the records I've seen was food was the most common thing that was exported by Chinese from Japan. You know, soy or rice but it seems like kingfish, because in Japan there might have been some demand, but definitely not like in China.
Okay. Thank you for the comment. I think I will look for it. The example for Japan is especially interesting because the emissaries, the envoys from Ryukyu, they brought dying chagrins.
Right.
And probably also other stuffs. We don't know what exactly, but we know chagrin, maybe also kingfisher, through the tribute relation. So which century are you talking about?
Well, early modern. So
Early modern.
like the peak of Chinese trade is second half of 17th century, but it continues all the way.
Right. Thank you. It's so interesting. Are there any
Now I want to look.
artifact from Edo period that made of feather?
Of feathers, yes, but of kingfisher feathers, I'm not sure. I looked, so in that Peacock article, I did do sort of a history of feathers. I thought I had found something so obscure, even Japanese scholars had not written about feathers. So I did dig up a lot, but I think there's a lot more to be done.
Oh. Now I remember what I wanted to say to respond to Elaine's question that in the second half of the 18th century, not only kingfisher feather but also feather of other birds died, and to imitate the kingfisher feather, the kingfisher blue, and to sold in Kanto as kingfisher feathers. There are cheaper feathers, substitutes, dyed.
Dyed with what?
With blue color. Looks like blue, but not that iridescent, shining, but still, at first glance, you think that it's kingfisher feather. They were sold on Kanto market.
Second half of 18th century.
Yes.
So by then lapis lazuli is
Already there, yes. Asa.
In your presentation, is the kingfisher feather is always combined with metal.
Yes.
There is another material other than metal.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for bringing this out. It's very important because I thought that the kingfisher feather was an independent technique until recently. I interviewed a museum specialist at the CUHK, and she told me, because we had the capstone project for students who made a documentary film of kingfisher feather working. Will be soon online in June, I guess. The sound argument that she made, Professor Xu Xiaodong from CHK, she made that feather working was not an independent technique in China, but derived from metalworking. So filigree technique was invented in the Song court at the 12th century BC, 12th century AD, right? And then Kingfisher feather was considered as an extension of this filigree technique. So it was always used in combination with metal. So people who wanted to do feather working, first of all, he has to know how to do metal working, right?
But it is possible to combine with another material.
I think so. But the gilt metal jar in the Fontainebleau was made of metal as well. But one record probably you will be interested in is that there record from the Han Dynasty thing during the Warring period, which is roughly 8th to 3rd century BC, that Kingfisher feather were used to decorate the curtain and interior as well. So that the famous Lady Xingjui's coffin was decorated with Kingfisher feather from the 165 BC.
Okay, thank you for a really wonderful presentation. Maybe we can continue the discussion over lunch, and we'll be back at what time?
2 p.m.
We'll be back at 2 p.m.
Thank you.
Welcome. Do we have a lunch break?
Yeah, it's already.
I'm hungry.
It's on the roof.